Protests are intensifying in Ferguson. The tension in that city did not let up when the national media left. The tension and outrage and frustration is once again on display night after night on the streets of North County, St. Louis. Last night, protesters gathered outside the Ferguson Police Department, and local news outlets report at least 8 arrests. Police said bottles were thrown at them. Those arrested were reportedly released without posting bond after what the Huffington Post describes as, quote, a strange negotiation in which police agreed to release them if protesters were quiet and remained on sidewalks. On Saturday night, a police officer was non-fatally shot in an incident that was apparently completely unrelated to the ongoing protests, but which nonetheless caused a stir in Ferguson and on social media as it unfolded. Meanwhile, some Ferguson police officers caught wearing "I am Darren Wilson" wristbands, getting a rebuke from none other than the Justice Department of the United States. In a letter to Police Chief Tom Jackson dated Friday, DOJ writes, quote, "We were shown pictures of officers wearing these bracelets. It was further reported to us that some officers affirmatively displaying these bracelets had black tape over their nameplates. The practice of not wearing or obscuring nameplate violates your own department's policies, which we advised you earlier this week when we requested that you end the practice immediately." And today, the Associated Press is essentially accusing Ferguson officials of price gouging, reporting they've been charging as much as $135 an hour to fulfill open records requests related to the police shooting death of the unarmed 18-year-old Michael Brown in Ferguson. For their part, the protesters in Ferguson show no signs of letting up. Organizers are calling for people to join them and converge on Ferguson on the weekend of October 10th through the 13th for what's being billed as a weekend of resistance. Joining me now, Liz Brown, columnist at St. Louis American and criminal defense attorney. Liz, can you describe to me the kind of ebb and flow of this? There was this massive tension, massive national attention. National media left. Things seemed to cool down. The grand jury process ground on, seemingly without end. And in the last week and a half, things have kicked back up. What's going on?
Well, I think that there have been a number of provocative acts that have occurred. When we look at last week, it began with the burning of the Michael Brown Memorial, and then the decision by the county police department that they're not going to investigate that. Then the police show up, and they have their guns, and they're dressed in fatigues, and they have their "I am Darren Wilson" armbands on, and that's another provocative act. So we have these continuing provocative acts cast against the background of there's no indictment, there's no movement, and Bob McCullough is still in the driver's seat of making the decision of whether there's going to be an indictment at all. So this has just been a building of provocative act after provocative act.
Is there a sense there that from folks in Ferguson, particularly the protesters, that there's not going to be anything like what they would perceive as justice in St. Louis County?
I think that is the overwhelming understanding and viewpoint that there will not be any action that comes out of Bob McCullough's office because he cannot be fair and impartial, that there will be no indictment. And I think the police are gearing up for that inevitability. And I think that the activists and the protesters on the street also are gearing up in response to that.
That is a really important point. All eyes were on the grand jury, particularly, in August when the national media had left. And the idea was, okay, well, Bob McCullough is going to present this case to the grand jury. Darren Wilson, maybe there'll be some criminal charge against him. All the signs we've seen coming out of that grand jury suggest that criminal charges may not be forthcoming. And this idea that both the police and the protesters are gearing up for that moment, when you think about something that would really set things off in Ferguson, it would be the formal announcement of no charges against Darren Wilson.
Absolutely. But then again, against the backdrop of these provocative actions, just think for a moment what it means for a police officer in Ferguson with a gun. Michael Brown's blood is still on the ground, wearing an armband that says, "I stand with Darren Wilson." That is a dangerous act of provocation. What they're saying to the community is, we don't care. We are going to do what we want to do. That's dangerous provocation, and that's why the Attorney General wrote that letter.
Yeah, that was a remarkable rebuke from the Department of Justice. And
yes.
Last thing here, Liz, is that people said the national media was responsible for those protests. What do you say to those folks, particularly given what we've seen the last week and a half?
I don't think that the national media is responsible for the protest. The responsibility falls squarely on the shoulders of Bob McCullough, because if Bob McCullough's office had acted quickly, had moved transparently, and had acted in a way that demonstrated to the citizens of Ferguson that justice would be pursued irrespective of where it landed, then we wouldn't be in this place. It's not the media's fault. It's Bob McCullough and his decision not to recuse himself from this very important case.
Liz Brown, thank you very much.
Thank you.
We have an update to bring you tonight on the South Carolina state trooper who shot an unarmed black man. It was all caught on the trooper's dash cam, and more of that video has been released. Perhaps the most interesting part. We'll have it for you next.